How are we supposed to keep victims of domestic violence safe when the people in charge of protecting us have no idea what they're doing? In this video, we're going to be looking at the case of Kiena Dawes, who ended her life sadly in July 2022 at the hands of systematic abuse from her then partner Ryan Wellings. Now this of course is a tragic incident, and I'll do my best to pay my respects to the people involved. I will use my knowledge of being a police officer for the last 10 years. I will be looking at the case, analysing the timeline of what we've seen happened, exploring the topic of narcissistic abuse, of control and coercive behaviour, and also speaking about the insane comments made in the courtroom and the failings of the police dealing with this awful case. The victim Dawes sadly left this earth in 2022 following a 2-year relationship of prolonged and sustained domestic violence at the hands of Ryan Wellings. Ryan Wellings has recently been sentenced to 6.5 years for various assaults and for control and coercive behaviour. Wellings was initially arrested for manslaughter because it was put forward by the prosecution that the reason why Dawes ended her life was due to the abuse which Wellings put her through. However, he was not convicted for manslaughter, but was convicted for the other offences I've just mentioned. The courts heard how Wellings' behaviour had a significant impact on Dawes' mental health, and despite multiple calls to the police, inadequate action was taken to protect this lady. Dawes even left a note on her phone describing Wellings as a monster and stating, "I was murdered slowly, Ryan Wellings killed me." Dawes reported Wellings to the police 5 times, 5 separate incidents. Now there were clear signs of escalation in this case, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the case, we're going to go through the different parts of the case, different incidents what happened, and we're going to review the escalation, which was quite clear that this was only going to end one way. Now with domestic abusive relationships, with narcissistically abusive relationships, and I don't even want to call this person narcissist. Ultimately, he was an abuser, and I think we get too stuck on labels at times. It doesn't matter in the end of whether this person had some kind of personality disorder. What happened, and any label attributed to this person is irrelevant. With domestic abusers, we generally see a very rapid onset of the relationship in the early stages. Grand gestures of love, of adornment, buying flowers, expensive jewellery, even declarations of love in the early days, and even declarations of marriage within the first few weeks. And these are generally referred to as a whirlwind romance. And the victim of this abuse doesn't see it as a form of control. Instead, they see it as, well, where's this person been all my life? Who is this person? They are so amazing, so kind and so wonderful. How can the person like this truly exist? And that's the key point. They don't exist. It's all a facade. It's a mask which these people wear in order to infiltrate somebody's life. And once they've infiltrated this person's life, they will slowly break them down and destroy everything that they are. This start of the relationship is known as a few different things. The most common one is love bombing, and love bombing is where the abuser will intoxicate the victim with their caring, their love, their adornments, and this is done for a few reasons. In these cases, the victims may see such grand gestures as kind, caring and loving. Often perpetrators of this kind of abuse will find vulnerable people, whether that's a single parent, whether that's who doesn't have the most finances, maybe it's someone who's suffered a significant trauma in their life and they're emotionally vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation. Either way, the abuser will extract information from the victim about their life, and then will they use that as a way to manipulate them, to draw them in, and ultimately to control them. This is exactly what happened to Wellings and Dawes. The pair met in January 2020. Within the first few weeks, Wellings had Dawes' name tattooed on his neck, and then a couple of weeks later had a tattoo of her face on his leg. Now we can see straight away that this should scream alarm bells. This grand gesture of love should be worrying to somebody in this kind of relationship, that this person, after just knowing them for a few weeks, has permanently marked their body with that other person. And then of course we see the continued escalation of this love bombing, of this capturing of the victim's feelings and the infiltration into their life. Only after about a month of them knowing each other, Wellings actually moved in. And again, this rapid escalation isn't uncommon in these kind of relationships. I've dealt with a lot of control and coercive relationships where they always say to me, the start was amazing, they were incredible, we moved in together really fast, we were engaged, we were going to get married. It's a manipulation tactic, and only with hindsight do we look on this and go, that was a red flag, that was worrying that happened so quickly. It's also worth stating that Dawes had her own mental health issues. She was diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder. She may have not been able to regulate her emotions enough to spot these sort of signs, and when you have someone who's very good at manipulating people, like Wellings clearly was, and someone who has previous history for domestic abuse, as Wellings did, it's likely that Dawes wouldn't have been able to say know, even if she wanted to. Now, moving in together so quickly may be seen as a grand gesture of love. We want to spend all the time together. Let's build a life together. But it is anything but. It's a way of implementing control, a way of policing them in their own home. A significant event happened on the 3rd of May 2020, where Wellings attempted to strangle Dawes with a phone charger. Now, non-fatal strangulation is a huge indicator of potential homicide in the future. It's said up to 7 times more likely that a homicide will occur in the future if this behaviour has been exhibited already. If this level of violence is happening already after they've only known each other for about 6 weeks at this point, then this is truly concerning. And the thing with non-fatal strangulation is it isn't a failed homicide. It's a way of exerting control. It's a way of showing somebody, I can end your life if I wanted to. When I was in the police and I would investigate cases of coercive control, the police use a checklist. Okay, and that checklist is called the Domestic Abuse, Stalking and Harassment Checklist. It's called a DASH. And one of the questions on there is, have they ever strangled you, suffocated you, attempted to drown you, restricted your breathing in any kind of way? If they answer yes, because of the links to homicide in the future, this automatically will become a high-risk incident. On the 29th of May, we also had another incident where Wellings threw a stool at Dawes, as well as further abusing her and more. Now, in this instance, Dawes did make a statement to the police, and I'm not sure what action was taken as a result of this, but here we see something significant which occurs quite a lot in these kind of relationships. Following this, Wellings sent Dawes a message stating, I'm disgusted in myself for scaring you like that. Here we have the usual thing that happens in this kind of relationship, in which the abuser will do something terrible and will then apologise for it later. I saw it so many times. The abuser will do something awful. They will assault, they will belittle, they will threaten, they will coerce the victim, and then when they feel that the victim is moving away or that control has been broken by what they've done, they will then apologise for them, and often they will then comfort them. And this is the real issue when it comes to these kind of relationships. The abuser is the one who causes all the pain, but they are also the one who comforts the victim afterward. The victim sees the abuser as both the perpetrator of the abuse and also the person who can console them after they've done what they've done. This creates all sorts of psychological impacts, from post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, codependency, and more. And when you pair this with significant emotional abuse as well, where the victim has been made to feel worthless, belittled, like no one else will take care of them, no one else will love them, the world is better without them, the perpetrator of those comments is then the one who offers them solace and support and says, but I will love you, I will take care of you, never leave me. And this is another reason why it is so hard for a victim to leave an abuser, because the abuser will weaponize empathy, and they will use empathy as a tactic and as a form of control in order to elicit guilt and to bring the victim back into their arms. They will promise they will change, they will promise apologies, and often when we see something horrendous happen, there is often a grand gesture of reconciliation. It's all a way of getting the victim back into their control. And the other reason why it's so difficult for a victim to leave these kind of relationships is because it can often be a choice between life or death. In the relationship, they know what to expect, they know what's going to happen. If they leave the relationship, they don't, and that often can be more terrifying for the victim. And it used to infuriate me when I would hear officers going, things can't be that bad in the relationship because you won't even make a complaint. You are incredibly wrong, and you are incredibly ill-trained and naive if you are an officer who says something like that, because the choice is often much worse than that. If the victim makes a complaint, they are potentially putting themselves at more harm and more risk than staying in the relationship. And in my new book, The Job is Fucked, Secret Diary of a Police Officer, I go into a lot of detail about coercive controlling behaviour, and I've had interviews with prominent people in this space detailing all of this. In February 2021, Dawes fell pregnant, and after appearing initially excited about the pregnancy, Wellings' behaviour again returned to being abusive. This then caused Dawes' mental health to seriously deteriorate. Dawes also detailed degrading comments that Wellings would make about her when she was pregnant. And this is another phase what we see in this kind of relationships called devaluation. This is where, following the initial love bombing phase, the abuser will make the victim feel worthless. They will use violence, they will use coercion, manipulation, emotional abuse to make the victim feel that they will never get anyone else and that the abuser is the only person who will ever love them and care for them, creating that bond of abuse and reconciliation. Dawes tried to end the relationship with Wellings and tried to kick him out of the flat. This then created created a further escalation in Wellings' behaviour, in which he threatened to set her car on fire and even got his accomplices to threaten her on his behalf. On July 5th, when she was 6 months pregnant, Wellings gave Dawes a black eye. The police were again contacted, and Dawes was seen on the body-worn footage of the officer stating that she was too scared to say anything. This woman had a black eye and she was too scared to say anything. Now, the officers may have arrested Wellings, and due to inefficient evidence, Wellings may have been released. No further action taken. But what we have here is we have a very significant missed opportunity. If the officers were to arrest Wellings, they could then convince Dawes to come back to the police station and complete a video recorded interview. This is more than just providing a statement. This is where the officers will sit down with the victim and they on camera will ask questions. They will use it to probe and to extract information. Specially trained officers were able to do this. I was one of them. The officers are then able to capture the emotion of the victim when they recount this story, and also able to capture the visual injuries present on the victim. This then could have been passed to the Crown Prosecution Service, who could have looked for a remand due to the high risk nature, and what would have likely happened as well is that the officers would be able to extract information, thus further strengthening the case against Wellings, and also looking at the high risk factors which we've already spoke about, the strangulation and the devaluation, may have allowed the Crown Prosecution Service to remand him into custody. This method of video interview is also very good because if you have a very vulnerable and intimidated victim, it means that they don't necessarily have to go to court to provide evidence because the video recording itself can be their evidence. Dawes then stated that Wellings was perfect when the baby was born, which shows again that this kind of abuse is intentional. They can turn it on and off. It's all about control, it's all about manipulation. And I've had people, when I've made content like this, detailing these sorts of things, message me and say, my ex did X, Y, and Z, did they know what they were doing? And the answer to that, unfortunately, is an unresounding yes. They were entirely in control at all times of everything they did to you, both the good and the bad. And this is why this abuse is so deadly, because it creates so much mental dysregulation in the victim's mind. And also what happens is because the abuser is able to control their temper and control their anger and then control how kind and loving they are at any moment, they're able then to blame the victim and say, well, you did X, Y, and Z, therefore it's your fault why I acted that way. And now that you're behaving again, this is the real me and this is the kind, loving me which you want again. Thus meaning that the victim has signed a contract in the relationship which they didn't know about, and if they follow these certain rules, then everything will be fine. Dawes then went on to say that Wellings would abuse her on a regular basis. He would slap her, he would hit her around the head almost daily, and this became normal. I remember dealing with a case like this where the victim told me that their abuser had punched them several times, but nothing more significant than that. The abuse was so regular in the relationship that it became normalized, and this shows the level of coercion which happens in these relationships where somebody assaulting you is no longer significant. It's just day to day. Therefore, for anything to be deemed as significant, it must escalate even more than this. This next thing is absolutely sick. Dawes wrote in a statement that Wellings threatened her with a drill and threatened to take her teeth out with a drill. Something like a drill is significant because it attacks the psyche of the victim in several ways. Like the strangulation, it's a way of showing I can do this to you if I want to, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And it's also disclosed that Wellings has threatened to throw acid in the face of Dawes before. They do not want the victim to ever have a life after them, and one way of securing this is to physically scar them and disfigure them so that nobody could ever want them again. There was also an incident reported in March 2022 where Wellings has dunked Dawes' head underwater. Again, like I said, the strangulation, the suffocation, the restriction of breathing, it's a form of violence, it's a form of coercion, a form of control, showing the victim that at any point I could end your life, at any point I could significantly harm you. And then the 11th of July, Wellings further assaulted Dawes, which rendered her unconscious. And Dawes even called the police on 999 when this happened, saying that she's just woken up, she's covered in blood, she can't move. And then what happened was Wellings later blamed Dawes for this assault. This is something called DARVO, and it stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim and Offender. And what happens with this is that the abuser will deny anything's happened, they will attack the person accusing them, and they will switch it round so that they're the victim and the person who has been assaulted or has been belittled or degraded is actually the abuser. It's a very sick and twisted manipulation manipulation tactic, which happens quite a lot in these kind of relationships. There are many cases I dealt with where they would say, they cheated on me or they did this, and I told them that it wasn't okay, and then I ended up apologising because I'd made them so upset for catching them out. It's messed up and it's wrong and it's twisted, but it does happen. And even in cases such as significant serious assaults like this, the abuser will make out that they're the victim. You don't know what she's like to live with. You don't actually know what this person's like. She's making me out to be the bad person, but really it's her because she's done this and she's done that. All that bullshit which spouts out these people's mouths. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, in relation to this assault, Wellings was arrested and was released on bail, and a few days later, on the 17th of July, Dawes got a phone call from an unknown number, and it was Wellings. Now, again, Dawes reported this to the police, but Wellings wasn't arrested as a result of breaching his bail. 5 days later, Wellings ended her own life. And unfortunately, we see this. It's called a hidden homicide. And as detailed in Jane Monckton-Smith's suicide timeline, is when abuse is happening and the victim cannot see any way out. The services fail them, the police fail them, and it's a truly tragic, tragic case of what's happened in this case. Now, the thing that really boiled my piss with this case was when Wellings was on trial for the manslaughter of Dawes, it was the comments made by the defence which really annoyed me. Now, the defence barrister for Wellings stated, "It's wrong to say the coercive and controlling relationship was in existence throughout. There were good times and bad times." Are you actually taking the piss? Are you actually fucking for real? Of course there were good times and bad times, because that's the nature of manipulation and abuse. Nobody wants to be controlled. Nobody is slapped on the first date and goes on the second date. There is a systematic and prolonged breaking down of another person in a relationship like this. And the reason why there were good times in the relationship was because if it was always bad, the victim would leave. The reason why good times occur is because when the victim is starting to not want to be in a relationship anymore, the perpetrator will turn back on the charm, loving, caring, in an attempt to stop the victim from leaving. It's fucking manipulation 101. I can understand why he said it, because he's a defence barrister. He's got to make out that it wasn't always that bad. Okay, I get what you're saying, but you're fucking wrong. And that comment alone highlights the lack of understanding and training when it comes to dealing with cases like this. Of course there were good times and bad times. Of course there are beautiful photos of them online when they went to Spain or they did something together, because that was probably a reward to the victim for staying with the suspect after they just beaten them up. And I don't often get upset on videos, but this proper twisted my head. And to highlight everything which has happened, when Wellings was convicted, it is stated that he was smiling in the dock. He has just listened to all of the awful things which he had put this lady through, the impact it has had on the lady and her family as a result of her taking her own life, and by the end of it, he was smiling. If that doesn't say that these people know exactly what they're doing and they have no empathy, they have little regard for anyone else but themselves, then nothing else will. And further to this, Ryan Wellings was known to the police. He was known for violent offences, he was known for burglary, he was known for criminal damage, and he was also known for previous domestic abuse. A key indicator of future behaviour is past behaviour, and I don't know whether Dawes got a Clare's Law disclosure, but if she didn't, that is a significant failing on the part of the police. A victim in a relationship like this doesn't live day to day, it becomes about survival. It's a slow grinding down of the victim. It is emotional coercion with a threat of physical abuse, and one of the most terrifying things someone in that relationship dynamic can do is think about leaving. And this has shown us that the police need a lot more training when it comes to dealing with these kind of cases, these significant coercive controlling cases, because often the victim doesn't want to make a statement. They don't want to prosecute their abuser for reasons which I've already mentioned. So therefore the police need a lot of training on how to investigate the victim's complaint and analyse the incident as a whole without the victim's support. Police need to be educated in spotting patterns of coercion, patterns of abuse, patterns of emotional coercion, identifying when someone is utterly terrified. And the courts need to really take this seriously. Control and coercive behaviour, narcissistic abuse, emotional manipulation, it can have a significant and awful impact on somebody's life. And it is a lot more common than we think. And this case truly was tragic, and I'm so sorry for what happened to that poor girl. And my only hope is that we can learn from the failings in the police and the system as a result of what happened. If you want to support me in creating more content like this, then please like and subscribe. The links to all my stuff, my books, how you can support me, my Patreon is in the link of this bio. I'll put in some links for resources and support too. Please carry on watching this channel and leave me a comment, let me know what you thought. Thank you.